If you have a desire to become a better version of your current self, then this podcast is for you. I share with you helpful thoughts, tips, and stories about fitness and self-improvement which you can apply to your life today. So for those of you that want to take control of your life, to learn, to grow, to become that which you desire most, I am your host, Connor Malone, and this is the pursuit of constant improvement. In today's episode, I'm going to be sharing with you some of the best tips about how you can implement new habits that actually stick. Because it's very common for all of us, we set new habits all the time. We try to set new habits, but the problem is they just don't stick. So what I'm going to go over with you today is why they don't stick and what you can do to bring in new habits into your life to help you achieve more in your own pursuit of constant improvement. So first of all, with habits, it's very important to understand, I talk about goals a lot in this podcast. Now with goals, of course, goals are what we have and where we want to be, but without habits, we can't get there. So it's really important to understand that we shouldn't always focus on setting goals, but we should focus more on our habits, on our systems, on things that we do in our daily lives, because that's what's actually going to move us forward. So as I said, in today's episode, I'm going to help you actually make those habits, but actually stick to them as well. Because I've been on this journey a long time in terms of self-improvement. I've set countless habits, and a lot of them I'm happy to admit I haven't stuck to, because that is life. That is humans. As we are humans, we always want more. We want to change things all the time, but it's important to outline what habits we actually need to stick to get where we want to be, and that's what we're going to go over today. Now, there's one quote I want to start this episode off with, because it's by a guy called James Clear. Now, if you've ever read the book Atomic Habits, you'll probably remember this quote. Atomic Habits is an incredible book. It's an incredible book about habits, how to actually remove bad habits, set good habits, just everything you need to know. And a lot of the things we're going to talk about today come from that book, come from this guy, James Clear. So if this is something you want to explore further, I would highly recommend you go over to his social media pages, buy the book, and explore this a little bit further. But the quote is, very simply, habits are the compound interest of self-improvement. Now, all that means is, if you're unaware of what compound interest is, it's essentially how things can start very small. These small actions that we're doing on a day-to-day basis, these small habits, they seem like not much at the moment, but after months, after years, they start to build up, they compound, and the interest we receive increases over time. So for us, that would be the benefits that we get from it, the results. They compound over time. So that's why it's so important to set good habits, so in weeks and months and years to come, we'll be in a much better place than where we are now, because our habits dictate where we actually end up in life. There's a really good quote, and it says that the quality of your life is determined by the quality of your choices. And your choices are with your habits, what you do on a day-to-day basis. So it's incredibly important. Now, the first thing for today is going to be around your environment, setting your environment. So when I say that word, what I mean by that is people think like environment, like where are you? Like where are you spending your time? Like where actually are you? Now, it's not just to do with that in terms of places. This could be people who are in that environment. What is in that environment? For example, where do you spend the most of your time? And who are you spending it with? Because that shapes so many of our thoughts and so many of our choices. So for example, let's take your group of friends. If you spend, or whoever you spend most time with, okay, if you spend a lot of time with a specific group of people, how do they impact you? Are they a positive impact in your life? Or does all they talk about negative things and they don't really push you to become better, to become more, because they're happy with just being the way they are? Well, then that's not really going to push you forward, is it? That's your environment. So no matter how good the habits are you put in, if you're stuck in these environments, these negative environments, you aren't going to get far, because you'll never escape that. So it's very important that before we start setting any new habits, that we check our environment. Where are we? Are you in a destructive place right now? Are you surrounded by people who don't want the best for you? Then you need to change that. There's something that James Clear says, in the sense that he says it in the terms of addictions, but it's in the same of habits as well. So addictions and habits can change dramatically if there is radical change in environment. And let me share with you just how. There's an incredible part of the Atomic Habits book that I mentioned, where they mentioned a story about Vietnam, right? These Vietnam War veterans. So these American guys who went to Vietnam, they fought in Vietnam in the war. And what they found was there was one group of people stationed there, and they found that almost 20% of them were addicts. They were addicted to drugs. Now, in this case, it was heroin, which is, as most people know, a highly addictive substance. And what happened was, once they returned home, they continued to check in on them. And what they found was that once they were home, after a year, only 5% of them fell back into their addiction. That's incredible. Only 5% of them. And within 3 years, only 12%. So you're thinking like all these people, and there was a considerable amount of people, they were thinking like, you would think there'd be thousands of people stationed in Vietnam, and 20% of them, up to 20%, were addicts, heroin addicts. Now, what's the point in this? The point I'm getting here is there was a dramatic change in environment. So they started off, they were at home, they were surrounded by these drugs, they were surrounded by these negative people, and then they got thrown out of their normal day-to-day lives into a war zone. Now, of course, this maybe it was applicable for us in terms of a war zone, but it just goes to show you it was a complete change in environment. First of all, they don't have access to drugs. It's the last thing they think of because of what they're surrounded by. Now, although it's an extreme example, you need to think of that in your own life. What's your environment like? Now, by no means am I saying let's go to a war zone, but what I'm saying is let's change that environment. Let's stop being surrounded by these addicts, and it may not be to drugs, it could be to anything. It could be addicts to laziness. That's going to affect you as it affected these guys. However, when they had a radical change in environment, they changed their habits, they changed their life. And it wasn't as if they just went straight back to it. As we've seen through that dramatic change in environment, they actually managed to sustain that when they left because of these habits they would have picked up while being away, which is pretty incredible. So that's one thing to think of before you change any habits. Think of your environment, who you're around on a regular basis, because if you start bringing on these good habits, these new fitness habits, these self-improvement habits, and everybody around is making fun of you, they're saying, oh, I don't know why you're doing that, you're going to be less inclined to follow through with them. So definitely something to think of, a big one there. Via negativa is our next one. Now what that is, it's a Latin phrase, and what it means is adding to your life by subtracting. Via negativa. Now why am I telling you this? Because when we think of building habits that we want to stick, we think of building in the sense of adding rather than just removing. Now all that means is adding to your life by subtracting, by taking something away, via negativa. So what we're doing is we're removing the negative, we're removing the bad. So it connects very nicely with the environment, but right here we're looking at very specific habits. So put simply, via negativa is the study of what not to do. So rather than you thinking, right, well, this is what I should be doing, I need to do this, I need to do this, what shouldn't you be doing? Look at what you're doing right now in your life. What's causing all the chaos and destruction in your life? What's causing you to not actually chase after your goals and to fail when you try to set these habits? That is what needs removed. Aside from that, mate, you might be in a great position. But as I said, it's the negativity that brings chaos into your life, not the absence of good habits. Now, as I said, all this simply is removing the bad. And some people think of that as like, oh, well, I don't want to focus on the negatives. I only want to focus on the positives. That isn't going to get you anywhere in this sense. We need to get these negatives out of the way. Because before we can actually start building on the good, that's just going to, you can think of the foundations, the foundational level of your habits comes from your routine, and if that's filled with negativity, it's going to all come crashing down. So you could think of things like, it could be addictions. Now, everybody thinks of addictions as it has to be drugs or alcohol. Addictions can be much more simple than that, but they can be just as destructive. Like you could be addicted to, it could be something in terms of like television, it could be gaming. You could be addicted to comfort, which if you have high goals, what you think you're ambitious, that isn't a good thing. That's going to hold you back. It's going to hold you back in life. It's going to make you susceptible to potentially mental health issues further down the line because you have no drive to actually try and improve upon yourself. So that is one thing you can think of. What shouldn't I be doing? Is it an addiction, or is it just something that I have been doing out of force of habit? How can I remove that? So a good one there. Because one of the things I often encounter when people come to me about losing weight, they say, oh, I know I need to be eating this. I know I need to be eating this. I know I need to be eating this. And I'm like, whoa, let's take it back a step. What shouldn't you be eating? What are you eating right now? Because you can add in tracking calories, You can add in everything else that's good to do with your health and your nutrition. You could be sleeping well, add in nutritious foods. But if you're still having that takeaway on a Saturday night, none of that's going to matter. You will get far more benefit from subtracting. Let's say, for example, you have a takeaway every week. You'll get far more benefit from subtracting that and removing that than you would from adding in, a high protein meal every day. So think of that. The things that are going to profoundly impact your life are things that you can remove, not necessarily things you can add in. One way you can apply that today, for example, is just by looking at your life and think, now you have to be honest with yourself here. You need to think, like, what is one thing that impacts me negatively? So it could be that takeaway. It could be that night out drinking that you don't really need to go on. There's no reason for doing it. And think of how it impacts you. Does it ruin your next day? If in the case of the takeaway, does it ruin your calorie intake for the day? Does it make you feel worse? How about trying to remove that? That would be a huge step in your habit building process. And not only is it a good habit to remove, but it's going to help all your other habits stick. So that's the key with this. Don't just think, oh, I'm just removing something because it's bad. You're removing the bad so that the good habits actually stick. So you can stick to them. So the chaos that we spoke about isn't brought into your life and all those good habits come crashing down on their foundational level. Now, an interesting thing that a lot of people have been doing recently is this 30 minutes a day for 30 days challenge, if you like. This is a very applicable thing. This is something I like the idea of, in the sense of, what is one thing you really want to become better of? What is one habit that you want to bring into your life? Now, it could be exercising. Now, 30 minutes of exercise for 30 days, if you're doing absolutely no exercise, is quite a lot. I'll give you that. But it's not a lot if you redefine what exercise is, in the sense that it doesn't need to be a 30-minute gym session. It could be a 30-minute walk. But just by you making that commitment to do something for 30 days, you're going to be far more likely to sustain a habit. So by thinking of this, what can I do for 30 minutes? Don't think of something too big. Think of something that over the next 30 days you can stick to. Look ahead. What's coming up in these next 30 days? Will this last? Is there an event you have to go to that's going to limit this? Think around that. Plan contingencies in place. But again, it's something you can apply straight away. One thing that you want to improve upon, pick one habit towards that. Do it for 30 minutes for the next 30 days. That'd be a great way to do it. And exercise is one of those. And again, just redefine what you think of exercise. It could be going out that walk. It could be doing some form of home workout. It could be relatively low intensity. But that's exercise. And it's 30 minutes for 30 days. Because there's a lot of stats out there that say, oh, it takes this long to form a habit. It takes, 60 days. Some people say 30 days. I think, to be honest, with a lot of the research that's out there, it is a relatively broad spectrum in terms of there's no solid. It's not a day 48. That's you got a solid foundational habit. But by doing it for 30 days, not only does that prove that you can stick to it, but it builds your confidence because you've actually followed through on your word. So if you're thinking about this and thinking, I could do that, make sure it's a habit that is nothing crazy. It's something relatively simple, and you'll feel far more confident after the 30 days. So another way to sustain habits there and build habits that will stick. Think of them in the long term. Putting non-negotiables first. Non-negotiables are tasks that you do not negotiate on. You say you're going to do them, and you do them. Now, for that to happen, they need to be sustainable tasks. It's not a non-negotiable would be, I'm going to do 1 marathon a week. Nobody's going to do that. That takes a lot of will to do. A non-negotiable could be something like brushing your teeth in the morning. It could be drinking a pint of water when you first get up. And you don't always need to think of this on a daily basis. You could think of this on a weekly basis. My non-negotiables are on a weekly basis. So I would say that I have no less than 4 workouts per week and 1 cardio workout per week. So 4 weight training, 1 cardio workout per week. Now, often I'll do 6, 7, potentially even 8 workouts in 1 week. However, as a non-negotiable to do at least 4 because I know the impact that resistance training will have on my health and that 1 extra cardio session will have on my health. So again, it doesn't need to be as high as that, but just set one thing in your week. Make sure it's the first thing that goes into your diary. What is your non-negotiables? Have a think about that. Because again, non-negotiables are what is really going to push us towards our goals. If your goal is to lose weight, then tracking your calories, that would be a big one. Or whatever kind of diet you're following, that would be a big one. Make that a non-negotiable. You're tracking. So everything else falls behind this. This is the priority, your non-negotiables. They should be the very first thing that enters your diary every single week. So again, that's one of the reasons why people tend to fail in habits, because they don't make it that non-negotiable. They don't make it that priority. So at the start of the week, that should be your first task. Another part of that with non-negotiables and what it does is it helps us limit our desires. Because by having clear non-negotiables, we're not thinking of a million different things. Oh, I need to do this week, this week, this week. Try and limit it to 3, 4, potentially even 5, okay? And they have to be relatively simple tasks. Again, things that you can adhere to, as I said earlier. Because with desires, we all have many of them. We all think, oh, I want to do this, I desire that. But by having too many desires, we get overcome by just work. We get overworked and we fail. Habits inevitably fail when we set too much of them and we desire too much. So by having non-negotiables, you make it clear what it is you desire. It could be one thing, it could be 2 things, 3 things, maybe up to 5 things. But set them in stone, make it clear what you're working towards, and make them non-negotiables. Habit stacking. This is the next thing we're going to be moving on to. One of my favorite habit building tricks that I've used over the years. Now, habit stacking essentially is when you add one habit on top of another habit. They're triggered by each other. So we often think of habits as separate things, like I do this and then I've got this habit. However, one habit can set the tone for the rest of the habits. They can cascade off of one another, like dominoes, like a domino effect. I'll give you an example. So last year, I really wanted to implement these high performance days that I've spoke about before. And that is one day where I get more work done than any other day, an extremely high performing day, something that I couldn't sustain for say 7 days a week, but I do it once per week. Now, what that includes is getting up early in the morning. Get up at 4 o'clock on my first alarm. That is the very first habit because it makes me uncomfortable and it gets me up, it gets me out of my bed. It's something I don't usually do. Now, what I'd done after that is I stacked multiple habits on top of that. So they each triggered each other. So I also wanted to do a little bit more cardio at the time. So I thought, right, I'll go a short run straight after that. So as soon as I get up, next habit that's triggered, I go a run. Another thing I do is that I read these daily readers. I have 2 of them. They're called daily readers, but I catch up on them usually twice a week. So I'll read a few pages of each and I do that throughout the whole year. However, I usually just done that whenever I had the time and I found I was falling back in them. So I thought, hold on, why don't I stack that on top of my run? So what I had was I had the alarm getting up at 4. My first habit was to get out of bed on the first alarm. That then triggered, right, what's the next thing? It's the run. And then when I got back in from the run, I read my daily readers. So there's 3 habits that I wanted to pick up. I stacked them on top of each other. So that is habit stacking. As James Clear puts it, build new habits by taking advantage of old ones. So all that is the first one. What is a habit that you currently do and how can it trigger another habit? It could be going to the gym. Maybe you want to listen to more audiobooks, more podcasts, more self-improvement content, more any content that you're trying to absorb. Why don't you pair that up with your workouts? That's another one that I've done. So rather than just, right, I'm going to the gym to do this, well, that's also my time to listen to my audiobooks. So again, we're stacking habits on top of each other. Now, it's important as well to talk about that foundational habit, that potentially old habit that we're putting new habits on top of. It needs to be a strong habit. So for example, me waking up at 4 a.m. If I didn't get up at 4 a.m., I wouldn't go that run, I wouldn't get my daily readers done, and I wouldn't have done the first habit in the first place. So they all fall on top of each other. So you need to make sure that it starts with a strong habit in the first place. So that is key. Don't start with something too difficult. Start with something that you can simply do and it will kickstart the process of all the other habits. Now, one way that you can do this going into this week, other than your gym workout, could be on your Sundays. I talk about reflection all the time. One thing that I encourage clients to do is we habit stack by making our Sunday our kind of day of preparation. So what we do is we sit down on that Sunday, they plan their week ahead, so they put that into their diary, and they also reflect on the week they've just had. So not only are we doing those in 2 separate days and make it a little bit confusing, we're stacking these together. Now, the thing that all these habits have in common is they're very reflection-based. So when habit stacking, try to get habits that are relatively similar in the sense that they are all working towards the same thing. So don't be right, I'm doing some uni work while listening to an audiobook on self-improvement and then making a meal at the same time. These things don't align with each other, so it's unlikely they're going to stick. Whereas if you pick things that all kind of follow one another, you're far more likely to stick to them. So again, coming back to that, how do we stick to habits? We make habits that follow one another by habit stacking. So that's something that you can apply to your life today. Now, to finish with today's episode, I want to finish you with a couple of things that you can apply, like I said, today from these things that I've just spoke about. The very first one is in terms of environment and evaluating it, in the sense of listing what is good and what is bad about that. Because before you can make that radical change in environment and kickstart these habits, we need to find out what is actually good and what is actually bad. We need to almost list them. Now, some things won't be clear, but what we're looking to do here is not necessarily this, oh, this is kind of good, this is kind of okay. We want to find out, right, this is bad. Quite clearly, this is causing chaos, destruction, this is holding me back. So how can you do that? Very simply, you can break down the tasks in any day. Say, well, potentially maybe you spent time with a friend, you went to the gym, you done this habit, maybe you went out for drinks, whatever. Look at all those habits and just ask yourself, did this make me better? Did this push me towards my goals? If not, then you've got a good chance that that should be removed. So think of these habits that affect your environment, remove the bad, and then you can add the good on top of that. But you'll have a profound impact by removing the bad first. So all you need to do is remove that one habit. Now, once you have done that, pick one thing that you want to get better at over the next 30 days. Now, if that thing is with your fitness, very simply, you could pick one exercise that you're going to do in the house for the next 30 days. So it could be a short workout, could be that gym workout. How are you going to manage that for the next 30 days? Plan it ahead, schedule it. And then all you need to do is spend 30 minutes doing it for the next 30 days. But for this to actually happen, it has to be a very strong desire. It has to be something you want. There has to be reasoning behind it. Because if there's no reason behind it, on day 3, when you can't be bothered doing it, you're going to think, oh, well, it's not that important anyway, I'm not going to do it. If something has strong importance, strong value to you, you're far more likely to follow through in it. Because you're going to think, well, what happens if I don't do this? Well, then I don't get to here. And if that here is so important to you, you're far more likely to do it. So make sure of that. Now, on top of that, set non-negotiables towards that habit. Anything that helps make that one habit easier. So for example, the example you use, that 30-minute workout, a non-negotiable could be that you lay out your clothes the night before. Every single night you lay out some clothes, you pack some extra gym clothes just in case you forget, maybe put them in your car. Make that a non-negotiable. It doesn't sound big, but it's going to help you with that habit, with this 30-day habit. So it will help you follow through on it. It will help it stick. And the very last thing is, once you've got that over those 30 days, start to habit stack. Like we said with your gym session, maybe that's when you listen to your audiobook. Maybe when you get in from the gym, you make a healthy meal and then you sit down and you read your daily readers, your books. And there you have it. You've stacked habits from there. Now, by using those tips, you're going to make habits far more likely to stick. And that makes you far more likely to succeed with your actual habits and what you're actually trying to pursue. Now, I have 2 quotes to finish with today. The first one is again from James Clear, the King of Habits. And it's a really good one. I like this one. And he says, if successful and unsuccessful people share the same goals, then the goal cannot be what differentiates the winners from the losers. Now, all he's saying there is loads of people have goals. Loads of people want to be fit. Loads of people want to be healthy. Loads of people want a six-pack. Loads of people want to be millionaires. Everybody has goals like this. So what differentiates the winners and the losers? Well, it's their habits. It's how they work towards these goals. That's what changes them. That's what the difference is. So by changing your habits, you're going to go from being that loser to being that winner. Because as this next quote goes, habits are what separate the winners from the losers, success from failure, and growth from stagnation. So make sure your habits are pushing you towards your goals and you're not just daydreaming, thinking of these goals. You actually have solid fundamentals, habits that you can stick to in place to help you get there. I hope you found today's episode valuable. I hope you can take one of these actionable tips and you can apply them to your life, which will help your next habit stick and help you push towards your goals. As always, thank you for spending your most valuable asset with me, your time listening. If you can, be sure to share the episode, give it a like. If you're listening on Spotify, be sure to rate it. I would deeply appreciate that. And I wish you the best in your own pursuit of constant improvement. Thank you for listening.